Hello, my name is Scott Bridge, and you are watching the Butler Beat. My guest today has several jobs. She is a writer, she is an author, she is an educator, she is a motivational, inspirational speaker, she is an ambassador, she is a creative consultant, and she is also known as Coach E. My guest today is Elaine Hall. Elaine is the 2014 Howard L. Schrott Lecturer in the College of Communication here at Butler University, and she is speaking here on campus as part of the College of Communication Conference on Ethics and Public Argumentation. She is my guest today. Elaine, welcome.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you.
Tell me about, gosh, where to start, because you have so many titles, but I guess let's start. You are an autism activist.
That's right. That keeps it really simple. Kind of puts it all together.
But it's a huge story. So talk about your story.
Well, thank you. I'm honored to be on your show and very honored to be the Howard L. Schrott recipient and lecturer this evening and here today at Butler. My story, I was a Hollywood acting coach. I worked in film and TV with the biggest, brightest stars. And what I wanted more than anything was a child of my own. And I wasn't able to give birth biologically, so I adopted a little boy from Russia. He was 23 months, and this was 18 years ago. And when he came to me, he was very ill physically, and we got him really healthy, but he did not catch up developmentally. He spun around in circles, he stared at his hand for hours at a time, he banged his head. All today we would know autism, but back then we didn't have the type of resources or billboards or organizations that revealed autism. And what I learned was that I kept thinking he would catch up, and he didn't. So he had a diagnosis of autism, and traditional therapies did not work for him. I learned about a doctor in Maryland, Dr. Stanley Greenspan, who was working differently with individuals with autism. He felt that all of the seemingly bizarre behaviors were actually very purposeful, and that the most important thing was to create relationship. So I brought my son to see him and got on this whole path of relationship-based intervention. And that's what kind of got me from here to Butler.
And talk about your son today. His story is very, very inspiring.
Yes, well, since the traditional therapies didn't work, I sought creative people, like actors, musicians, dancers, to join his world. So, for example, if he would flap his hands, we would flap with him, and we'd turn it into birds, and we'd flap all around together. And if he would stare at his hand, we'd stare at our hand and just start opening and closing and holding hands and ring around the rosies together. So all kinds of things interacting, and he slowly, slowly emerged from his severely withdrawn, tantruming behaviors into being calm and together and very extremely bright. Still nonverbal, still with autism. And today, he is almost 20 years old. He has a job working as an organic gardener. He presented at the United Nations for World Autism Awareness Day, and he performed on stage with Crosby, Stills, and Nash, presenting using an iPad to speak. So it's been quite a journey, quite a journey.
Your story, though, has brought so much hope to the millions of people who deal with, I think it's over 2 million people have been diagnosed with some form of autism. And so when you were working with your son, At what point did you feel that you were finally making some progress? That you, at what point did you finally think, I've got some hope here?
Well, fortunately, I always felt hopeful.
Why?
Well, he was my son. And the hope really was that we could connect. And whenever I would join in his world, we connected. So to me, that was what was more important than anything else. It didn't matter to me if he was going to be able to live a typical life. What mattered more was that we had a relationship and that he was happy. So, but what started happening more and more and more is as we entered in his world and learned that all of his behaviors were purposeful, he was able to calm his body and be more regulated and be more present. And I learned it was really more about curing me than curing autism. It was about curing my need for him to be normal. It was about getting over my obsession with fitting in. And it was more about learning how to regulate myself and find peace within my own soul. And
So how did you do that?
how did I do that? Well, first of all, I learned from the best, most professional people in autism. I learned from Dr. Stanley Greenspan, from Dr. Barry Prezant. I read every book that had been written. I was on the internet. I went to conferences. I sought out other parents. I think that's one thing that's really important. Autism by nature is an isolating disability. It's an invisible disability. You see a child that's tantruming and you think, people may think there's something wrong with the parenting, right? And so it's really important to not isolate and to have other parents. I would see a parent who maybe their child was 2 years older than my child, and I would ask them for help. I had to reach out for help. I prayed a lot. I meditated. Most important for me was to have a very strong center, to be connected to my highest good at every moment, because my child and many, many children that I've experienced with autism are highly sensitive individuals. There's a myth that individuals with autism lack in empathy and sensitivity, and it's the opposite. They are the most sensitive human beings I've ever had the privilege to know. And it is their sensitivity that may cause them to recoil from the world. I have a student, Spencer, her mom described it to me that once a bee went past her ear, we would hear the sound of a bee, but to her it sounded like a 757 going past. So of course she's going to recoil, of course she's going to scream, of course. So if I understand that, I'm not going to look at the behavior as anything wrong, but it makes perfect sense. Just a natural human response. So once I learned about autism and learned what all of the things were going on, it was easy for me not just to have compassion, but to appreciate and accept and celebrate every little small thing my son would do. Like, I sometimes feel that parents of children with disabilities, we're the lucky ones, because our challenges are greater than raising a typical child, but the rewards are so profound. The first time my son said "mama," he was 4 years old, and I just bawled my eyes out. It's a gift. It's a huge gift.
But one of the major challenges that I read in preparation for our talk today is that kids with autism some of them are diagnosed later than they could be, and that health insurance does not cover the therapy for a lot of them. Your son was very fortunate that you could devote as much time as you could to him. What do you tell those parents that don't have those resources?
Fight for insurance rights. I mean, fortunately, California is one of the states that is now covered by insurance. It wasn't when Neil was younger. The other thing is, I mean, I use mostly volunteers. You see, traditional therapists were not getting joining Neil's World. They thought I was a Looney Tunes. So I had students and volunteers. I trained them in my living room with every single thing I was learning. And so lay people can do this. It's about finding love and compassion and understanding. I started a theater program called The Miracle Project. And it's a theater and film program for individuals of all abilities, including autism. And we only have 3 staff. The rest are all volunteers. So I think you can make use of resources. And I know Butler has programs here where they're training students. And so perhaps some of these students can go into the homes or hire them at rates that aren't as, go to your churches and synagogues and find volunteers and educate them in autism and create connections in low-cost ways.
I saw a video that you were in, and the kids you were working with were all musical.
Yes.
And it was very impressive what they were able to do and how they were able to express themselves, and they found that expression through music.
Very many of, how do I say this? What some people would term obsessions, I like to look at as preferred interests. So if you have a child who on their own will make lots of noises and sounds, perhaps they can benefit from music therapy and music. If you have a child that runs around a lot, perhaps they can benefit from sports activities. So I created this program called The Miracle Project, and we had children, teens, young adults of all abilities, from kids that are minimally fluent to kids that are highly, highly expressive. And together we create original plays with original music. And nonverbal autistics will type lyrics to the song that a highly verbal musical child will sing. Yeah.
Now, and that's another myth that we probably need to talk about, is that for approximately half of these children, from what I understand, average to above average intelligence. So autism is not an indicator of low intelligence by any stretch.
Autism is not an indicator of low intelligence. And there's another myth, too, about high functioning and low functioning.
Yes.
I actually prefer not to ever use those terms. Because, well, for one, my son, if you put him in a crowded classroom with lots of noise and lots of activities, he may put his hands over his head and run around in circles. And one would look at him and say, well, that's a very low-functioning autistic. You take him and those 30 students and you place them in the Santa Monica Mountains, he will lead those 30 kids on a hike in paths that had not even been grounded yet. So you would say, oh, he's high-functioning. So what I like to say is different abilities in different environments with different supports. So in a classroom, he may need headsets as support. He may need an interventionist to help him navigate the climate there. Whereas if you put him out in the mountains, he doesn't need a one-on-one. He can go on his own. So I kind of take those high-functioning, low-functioning, or high intelligence, low intelligence, just really put in the environment. And if you think about it, we're all kind of high-functioning or low-functioning, right? Based on the environment that we're in. If you put me in a real technical environment, I'm going to seem like I'm very low intelligence and low functioning. Put me in a room where I can talk creative ideas and concepts, and I will be looked at as high functioning. So it's no different than us.
Talk a little bit about how technology has been a big aid in helping these autistic kids.
Technology has been transformational. So for my son Neil, who's nonverbal,
Yes.
he now has an iPod with an app called Pro-Loquo to Go. And with that, he can order in restaurants. It has voice activated. He can order in restaurants. He can go to the store and shop. He can be with people without having the intensive one-on-one support. The support person can be in the background, and he was actually able to go to a camp and navigate the camp without his own one-on-one support last year. It's been phenomenal. A lot of kids are having breakthroughs with iPads and being able to navigate and express wants, needs, and desires using the icons, using Google. Also, he uses his iPad to type more intensive thoughts and is able to access academic curriculum in ways that he could never do before. And as I mentioned, he used his iPad at the United Nations last year for World Autism Awareness Day and presented a speech and a PowerPoint presentation. So it's really been phenomenal in bridging that gap between the autistic world and the neurotypical world.
I saw a video where he was having a conversation with his boss on the farm, and his boss would ask him questions, and Neil would communicate with him just through the iPad.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you meet with parents who are at the end of their rope, what do you tell them?
I tell them it's okay to cry, it's okay to feel sad, and I let them know they're not alone, that there's a tremendous amount of resources for them, and that the challenges of raising a child with autism, they're huge and profound, and yet they become stronger, more extraordinary people. And one of the things I like to tell parents is that one day, everything that they have learned, they're going to be able to give back, so that there's purpose in the challenge.
In some of the videos that I saw, it seems as though the junior high and high school years for a lot of these kids are excruciating.
Yeah.
Do school systems need to do a better job of educating their students on how to deal with autistic kids?
So Scott, that's two questions, so I'm going to take them apart a little bit. Okay, one is that puberty is really difficult. It's difficult for a neurotypical child with all kinds of changes that are happening in the brain and hormonally, and it's actually miracle grow on it for a child with autism. My son would go from 0 to 60 in terms of raging and acting out during puberty. I think parents need to be told that this will probably happen. And if it doesn't, you're lucky. But because we're not told. And so when it happens, it's like, oh my gosh, who came down from, an alien has taken my child away.
Yes.
And that you will get through it, We did get through it, and we're on the other side, thank God. And but puberty was really challenging, and it's really important to find more physical opportunities, find places where they can run. I heard a teacher once, a middle school teacher, said that no middle schoolers should be in school during that age. They should all be working on a farm somewhere.
Right.
So just puberty in itself, and can be very challenging for our kids. That's one thing. The other question is, should school systems be better educated? Yes, 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 yes. Should administrators be educated? Yes. Should teachers? Yes. Should students? Absolutely. It's critical, really critical.
But what should they be educated to?
Well, I've come up with an approach, I actually wrote a book on it called The 7 Keys to Unlock Autism. And really it's about understanding autism from the inside out. And I think there are critical components. I mean, one is that when we relate to an individual with autism, it's really important for us to have our own center and to set our intention to be calm and curious, not judgmental or controlling. Because one of the things that it's really challenging, and I have many friends now who have autism, who I learn from more than anybody, that so much of when you have a disability, people want to take away your own control over your life. And if we're controlling ourselves and calm, we can allow the other person the integrity to express themselves. So that's the first thing, is really be calm, be curious, be non-judgmental, be appreciative, be accepting. Why? Know that all behavior is communication. No one is ever tantruming for out of nowhere, ever. Be curious, what's going on? I remember getting phone calls from the school. Out of nowhere, Neil just knocked a whole table over in the cafeteria. And I would say, is it really out of nowhere? Like, yes, he was fine. And then, well, tell me what happened before. And there's always a before. Well, he didn't want to go into the cafeteria that day. He didn't want to go in, but we told him if he was going to eat, he needed to go in the cafeteria. Okay, number one. Number two, well, did anything else happen? Well, there were some kids and they dropped a loud tray. Oh, okay. Well, anything else happen? Yeah, a group of cheerleaders came in and started yelling. And then out of nowhere, Neil just threw everything off the table. It's incredibly sound sensitive. What happened when he threw everything off the table? Well, we took him out, of course. So they just rewarded him. Had they listened to him in the very beginning, what did he want? He didn't want to go into the cafeteria. If they had stopped right there, none of this would have happened. So listen to the child that doesn't speak. Listen to their behavior. It's so critical. If they had only had him eat in a quiet room somewhere with two other kids, the goal of eating still would have happened, right? So it's really important for educators and students to understand that there is never an out of nowhere, to understand this extreme sensitivity that individuals with autism have sensorially. Like sounds that sound like nothing to us can be deafening, can hurt. Temple Grandin describes it that a sound can be like someone drilling her tooth without Novocaine. Visuals can be overwhelming. So a room with tons of stuff on the walls can be really disorienting to an individual with autism. Clothes, scratchy clothes, can feel like sandpaper on the skin. So we have to be really sensitive and tune into that child, into that individual, and know that they're doing the best they can. That the other thing, and this is unpopular, but eye contact is overrated. There are so many reasons why some kids can't give eye contact. It can actually hurt. The light can come in. The faces can be distorted. So choose your battles. Really tune into what is the most important, which I feel is communication and relationship. And that's the most critical component, because everything else can come secondary.
Would you please talk about Autism the Musical?
Okay.
That has to be a very unusual name for a musical. So talk,
Yes.
but it's award-winning. Talk about that, please.
Okay, so I started a theater program for individuals with autism where it's fully inclusive with neurotypical individuals with autism. And I started it, and my second year, a group of filmmakers asked if they could film a session. And I said, sure. Next thing I know, it became, they filmed 6 months of me and a group of children with autism and their volunteers and families. And then it was screened at the Tribeca Film Festival in New York. HBO saw it, and it became an Emmy Award-winning HBO documentary that shows the spectrum. Autism is a spectrum, so it shows the spectrum of autism from a nonverbal autistic, my son Neil, to highly verbal Henry Stills, and everything that goes on in between. And in the midst of it all, we put on a full-blown original musical.
How did you do that?
How did I do that?
Lots of patience.
Well, patience and labor of love. Basically, we had
And
12.
that's some of your background too, we should say. You have a lot of background in
Yes,
theater.
I've been teaching children acting, singing, and dancing since I was 6 and 7 years old. So it's my passion, it's my love, it's self-expression. And I also had a theater program in Los Angeles called Kids on Stage, which used theater for self-esteem for children. And as I mentioned, I worked in the film business as an acting coach. So when Neil started doing better, and I went through a divorce and wasn't able to stay home with him anymore, I basically prayed and asked what I was supposed to do, and the answer came very strongly: teach children with special needs acting, singing, and dance. And I created this theater program, Beginner's Luck, and had no idea what I was doing. It was just a vision of a fully inclusive musical theater program. And the first 11 weeks were totally chaotic. We had kids running around. If one child needed to hide under a table, we'd have a volunteer go under that table with them. And if another child needed to run around the room, we'd have a volunteer play chase with them and run around the room with them. One student was only wanted to focus on his artwork, Ezra, and he would draw, and every time he would look up, we'd go, "Oh, you're participating," and he would draw again, and he'd look up for another couple seconds. We'd say, "You're participating." Finally, he participated in the entire class, and he jumped up and said, "I'm participating." So gradually, this group of wayward actors came together, and we wrote original songs and an original play and performed an original musical in front of state-of-the-art theater, packed audience, standing ovation, and went without a glitch. So that's what's documented in Autism the Musical.
When you speak as the Howard L. Schrott lecturer, what's going to be your message?
When I speak as a Howard L. Schrott lecturer, I'll be talking about advocacy and activism, and how all of us, if we find our passion, we are activists. And how do we show up in the world? How do we inform? How do we teach? How do we act? For me, my passion is not just autism. It's bringing out the best in myself and others. And autism has become a vehicle for that. My son is also an activist. He calls himself an emissary for disability. And how is he an activist? He says with his humor and his intelligence. And just because he doesn't talk doesn't mean he doesn't have ideas. And he wants to be listened to. So when I speak, I'll be giving examples of my story, but really it's about how each of us can take our passion and make a difference in the world just by trusting who we are and what we know.
Elaine, thank you very much. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you. My pleasure, Scott. Thank you.
We'd also like to thank Professor Christine Taylor for providing all the technical support for this edition of the Butler Beat. Have a good day. I'm Scott Bridge.